After Moscow and Kiev, Emmanuel Macron in Berlin to huddle over Ukraine. The French president's host is also fresh off the plane. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz just back from Washington. This to host Macron and his Polish counterpart Andrej Duda. Press statements expected. We will carry them. We'll be listing if the three are on the same page. What with 100,000 plus Russian troops still surrounding Ukraine on three sides, and Macron and Vladimir Putin talking up areas where compromise might be possible. How did the French leader's good cop routine in Moscow go down over in Kiev, where he was earlier? And what's the right road to de-escalation? Today in the France 24 debate, we're watching this diplomatic frenzy over Ukraine, and joining us from Elm in Poland, France 24 correspondent Gulliver Cragg will be with us shortly. From Washington, our correspondent Ketevan Gorgistani. How are you?
Hi, Francois. I'm good. Thank you.
From Berlin, Ulrike Franker, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
And from Moscow, Alexandra Filipenko, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation that you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, while Russia talks up diplomatic solutions, let's just remind everyone of what's at stake here. It's also continuing to feed us this daily diet of defense ministry images of military drills. These pictures are of maneuvers involving the Air Force near Krasnodar. That's across from Crimea to the southeast of Ukraine. Before dropping his suitcase in Poland, Gulliver Cragg went close up for a view of the buildup to the north, across the border from Belarus, as seen from the Ukrainian side.
Across this border in Belarus, Russia has amassed troops and equipment, some of it just 50 kilometers from here. Ukraine's border guards say they've got this covered.
Державні прикордонні служби є бойові резерви, які у разі необхідності будуть найкоротші терміни підтягнуті до охорони державного кордону.
Yet the guards have not raised their alert level because of the Russian maneuvers, he says. The view from their surveillance drones may help explain why they haven't felt the need to. Forest and marshland cover almost the whole of the Ukraine-Belarus border. Terrain that tanks like this one, a trophy from the Donbass war now standing outside the military museum in Chernihiv, would struggle to cross swiftly.
На карте, как это рисуют, если видели стрелочки, там Украина и со всех сторон там стрелочки. Вот если тут войска, значит они будут наступать вот напрямую по Киеву. А на самом деле это очень сложно. Не могу сказать, что невозможно, но очень сложно.
But firing artillery across the border is not difficult, as Mihailo knows only too well, being a native of Donbass who fled the shelling there in 2014. He does take the Russian threat seriously, as do the city authorities here in northern Ukraine's largest city.
Они заявили, что мы остановим все программы развития города, социальные программы, и пустим эти деньги на укрепление обороноспособности города.
Life in Chernihiv seems to be going on calmly, as normal. But then you notice all the signs for bomb shelters have been refreshed.
Они способны укрыть 80% населения, но там нет туалета, там нет воды, поэтому в случае военных действий основная часть населения будет эвакуирована.
There are more elaborate shelters under some public buildings, like this maternity hospital.
Таких помещений около 100 в городе Чернигове.
Конечно, чувствуем. Раз войска стоят вдоль границ Украины, значит, мы же понимаем, что если ружье висит на стене, оно может и выстрелить.
Among the equipment here, spades and pickaxes for digging through rubble.
Yeah, so this atmosphere of uneasiness. Alexandra Filipenko, we heard the Kremlin again this Tuesday say, oh, those Russian troops that are to the north, they're just there for military drills. It's just temporary. They're not staying for good. What do you make of what's going on that northern flank there?
Well, I think most concerning are now not only 100 plus 1,000 Russian troops on the border with the Ukraine and Russian-Ukraine, but also more than 30,000 soldiers that are going to be in Belarus for this military drill that's called United Resoluteness 2022. There are so many servicemen that are going there to Belarus that are already there, and we know that Belarus opposition leader of Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she said that usually Russian troops, when they come in, they stay for good, and Belarusians should be aware that they may stay there. And we know that Emmanuel Macron said that President Putin assured him that those Russian troops will definitely leave after this United Resoluteness will come to an end in a few weeks in February. But of course, any troops at the border, any troops that are moving within the country, close to the border, or especially to the neighboring country, when we're talking about Belarus, it definitely concerns all other countries, and it's definitely an issue for discussion. And that's one of the problems, I think, and one of the issues, one of the obstacles that is there for any other further communications or any other further peace agreements. Those troops, that's the main point, I think, right now.
All right, and we have Gulliver Cragg with us, who's joined the conversation. Gulliver, we just watched your report, and we really got a sense there of the confusion, right? You don't know whether it's tense or not.
Well, I think that's because different people have different attitudes in Ukraine. Some people are getting extremely worried, paying a great deal of attention to what the Americans are saying and watching TV and worrying about this on social media. Other people who are sick of the war that's already been going on for nearly 8 years, sick of all the speculation, don't want to pay attention to it and are trying to get on with their lives the best they can. I mean, so it really depends who you talk to. But then if you talk to people who know a bit more about military matters, like Mihailo, the director of the museum in Chernihiv, you know, they'll have a more nuanced attitude, which is there's clearly a threat here, but perhaps not everything that they're saying is a threat is really as much of a threat as they're saying it is, because of the evident logistical difficulties that there would be in trying to invade Ukraine from Belarus. So it's not just the fact that these forces are there in Belarus that necessarily means that they're going to attack from that direction, but that doesn't mean they might not attack from another direction or in some other kind of way, like airstrikes, artillery strikes, or other aspects of the hybrid war, if you like, cyber attacks and so on.
Yeah, so several fronts to worry about. In fact, Ukraine surrounded again on 3 sides. And while Emmanuel Macron was in Kiev earlier on Tuesday, Germany's foreign minister was touring the front lines in Ukraine's southwest near Mariupol. Annalena Baerbock is from the Green Party, which is more hawkish on foreign policy than their coalition leaders, the Social Democrats, the SPD, whose Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who made an express round trip to Washington on Monday. There, Berlin's reliability in the face of an eventual Russian invasion was once again tested, particularly when reporters once again asked about A, would there be an invasion, and B, what would then happen to that Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
This will entail severe consequences that we agreed upon together, severe sanctions that we have worked on together. So there will be a high price for Russia.
So Ulrike Franke, he talks about severe consequences, but he doesn't say what you heard Joe Biden say, which is there will be no more Nord Stream 2.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I would say that Olaf Scholz got what he wanted out of this visit in D.C. This was the first visit he did as chancellor to see Joe Biden, and he got the reassurances from Joe Biden that Germany is an extremely important and reliable partner to the United States. Joe Biden really made this point very forcefully and said there's no international issue of importance that we aren't discussing with the Germans. There's not even a need to kind of reassure the Germans that they are a reliable partner, because this was never in question. So Olaf Scholz got what he wanted. I'm
not so sure that Biden got quite what he wanted, namely this, very explicit assurance from the German chancellor that indeed Nord Stream 2 is on the table in terms of sanctions. That being said, I mean, Olaf Scholz really went as far as possible without actually uttering the words. Namely, he did say that the sanctions would be as strong as possible, that he was totally in line with the US, that, all options are on the table. So I think it is fair to say that, you can read into this that Nord Stream 2 is included here, but he didn't exactly say the words, which I think has to do with kind of domestic issues, and he was criticized for that. But nevertheless, this really was a sign or a display, let's say, of unity between Germany and the US.
Ketevan Gorgistani, did all go to script during that brief visit by the German chancellor?
Well, I think we were expecting this pretty much to happen the way it unfolded. We were expecting Joe Biden to be a little bit more forceful to talk or mention Nord Stream 2. And everyone pretty much expected that it would be hard to get that commitment, at least publicly and openly, by the German chancellor. But what was even more interesting than the fact that Joe Biden was extremely categorical when he talked about how Nord Stream 2 would be dead in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine was when he was asked, well, the Germans are in control, basically, of that pipeline. So how do you expect you will be able to block that pipeline if you don't get a firm commitment from the Germans to do that in the event of an invasion? And Joe Biden simply said, I promise you, we will be able to do it. So the question now is, what does that exactly mean? Did he get some assurances in private from the Germans? Or is the United States willing to possibly go back to the initial idea, which was to possibly sanction that pipeline? Remember that last year in the spring, the Americans, the Biden administration, had decided to waive sanctions against the pipeline in order to sort of mend the relationship with the Germans. So that was also something that was pretty important and interesting when it comes to that Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Which one was it, Ulrika? Was it Olaf Scholz whispering him in his ear, or was it Joe Biden waving a big stick?
I can't tell you that. I think everyone hopes that if it comes to this, there would indeed be a common position. I think it is correct that Biden basically said, if there is a military intervention, another military intervention by Russia, we're going to shut down Nord Stream 2. And there was in brackets a little bit of independently of what the Germans say, but I lean towards thinking that if it really comes to that Germany and Olaf Scholz will indeed work together with Joe Biden on that. But there's a certain level of ambiguity here, and I also picked up on as you say, the kind of stick from Biden saying that no matter what you say, this is still going to happen. So that was an interesting moment.
Yeah, we've been watching we're going to be watching what Chancellor Scholz has to say during that press conference in Berlin. We'll also be watching the French president. After all, we saw for more than 5 hours, Emmanuel Macron was with Vladimir Putin. Those pictures have gone around the world of that giant table that they sat on, the pair of them. Alexandra Filipenko, your thoughts?
Orban had the same table.
He had Viktor Orban at the same table.
Viktor Orban had the same table and much warmer relations, I would think. Hungary is Vladimir Putin's great friend in Europe, so I wouldn't read too much into the strange choice of table.
All right, we'll leave domestic furnishings aside and just ask you, Alexandra Filipenko, what did you make of that press conference that, again, it was hours late?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that I must say a few words about this table, because I think it's the most notable part of these talks, this huge table. Of course, it drags attention, definitely. But yes, a 5-hour meeting, that's something very special. And I must say that this means a special relationship, because for President Putin, this means quite a lot. And I'm sorry for being a historical nerd here, but I have to say a few words that, first of all, Emmanuel Macron did a great thing diplomatically, that during this press conference and before that, during some interviews, he said that he understands the trauma of the great people of Russia, this great nation of Russia, and as well as Russian neighbors, of course. And that's exactly what I think President Putin needs to hear and what he wants to hear. And again, sorry for being this historical nerd, but there is also this historical trauma of Germany, let's say. And I think German foreign minister said it in one of those interviews, that she cannot imagine sending weapons to Ukraine, or any weapons that might be killing Russian soldiers. That was, I'm not sure about the exact quote, but the meaning was this. So this historical trauma is also very important for the relationship between Russia and Germany and Russia and France. And especially when social democrats are in power, because we remember that in 1970s, German Chancellor Willy Brandt developed this policy of rapprochement with Moscow. So there was this special relationship. And the last social democratic chancellor, Mr. Schroeder, he's not only a leader that was close to Russia, but he's also a friend of President Putin, and he's been working in Russian energy companies from 2005, and he's going to be on the board of Gazprom soon. So there is this special relationship. And of course, having this close relationship with President Macron is very important, because this means that President Macron is the only one who has, let's say, President Putin's ear, if I can put it this way.
All right, so Ketevan Gorgistani, having President Putin's ear, does that make Macron a softie? I ask the question because you read some of the inside the Beltway Washington press this Tuesday, very harsh for the French president.
Yes, there seem to be, at least within the journalist crowd here in Washington, D.C., and some of the think tankers, this criticism of Emmanuel Macron, and it has really been heightened in the last 24 hours. But that has so far been the case, a little bit toned down maybe in previous days or weeks. But there's been some sort of uneasiness, or maybe a lack of trust with Emmanuel Macron doing this maybe a little bit too much on his own, or trying to be the leader of the European diplomacy towards Russia, and also the idea that maybe the Europeans as a whole, and by extension Emmanuel Macron and France, being too soft on the Russians. This does play into this idea that maybe right now we're in the situation of good cop, bad cop, the French and the Europeans being the good cops, and the Americans being the bad cops. And you see that in the rhetoric, in the way that the different countries talk about the situation in Ukraine, talk about Russia. From the US, you have these threats, these imminent warnings of war, of attack, of aggression. While in Europe, and especially with Emmanuel Macron, you have this emphasis on diplomacy, on talks, on negotiation, on in-person meetings. That said, I have to say that as far as the Biden administration goes, at least in their public comments, everyone is insisting that this is not an issue among allies. We all have different ways of doing things, but we all want the same thing. And they said yesterday, the spokesperson for the State Department was asked a little bit about this idea of Macron going at it alone. And he said, look, it doesn't matter. What matters is that when Vladimir Putin gets a message, whether it's from the Americans, from the French, from NATO, or from anybody else, he's getting the same message, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and we're getting this sense from what the remarks we heard both in Moscow and in Kiev from Emmanuel Macron, Ulrika Franke, is that there are plenty of areas where there is a room for some kind of compromise. What are those areas where there could be compromise?
Yeah, I'm not sure I really agree that there are many areas where there's compromise. And I think actually Macron's visit to Moscow kind of showed how limited your possibilities are if you just emphasize dialogue all the time, but you have clashing interests. So I think Emmanuel Macron tried to find common ground, and he has invoked things, in the realm of arms control, transparency measures when it comes to troop movements, missile stationing, things like that, which is indeed also what the US and NATO in their official statements laid out. But I think, there is not that much room for common ground right now, because many things that Putin wants, neither Europe, the EU, NATO, or the US will give them. And maybe just one word, because we talked about how Emmanuel Macron's efforts were seen somewhat critically in Washington, D.C. and in the US. And I have to say, there were similar tones, voices coming out of some European capitals. I mean, there really seems to be a level of mistrust towards Emmanuel Macron. I mean, we talked about this big table, right? I mean, some German newspaper commented that at least the table was big enough to accommodate both men's ego. So you can kind of see a certain narrative that people feel that Macron is also doing this to, kind of score points in the presidential campaign and to kind of step into Angela Merkel's shoes. Now, he actually does have the mandate, I would say, to speak for the EU even more than he normally would as a French president, because France also holds the rotating EU presidency. So I think, this whole visit was right and correct, but there is a bit of mistrust coming from other Europeans as well. And the visit certainly wasn't seen as this great success, which is fair enough, because it wasn't, and that wasn't to be expected. But yeah, it's not as if everyone in Europe is looking to Macron to kind of lead the European side of negotiations.
Yeah, and on all sides pouncing on one word which got added to the English language this Tuesday: Finlandization. Emmanuel Macron pointing to Finland's status as a neutral country during the Cold War, with NATO at the time, leaving the door open to membership if need be. En route to Moscow Monday in the plane, Macron telling reporters that the Finlandization of Ukraine was one option that could help ease tensions, sort of have a semi-open door, if you will, for NATO membership. Later in Kiev, the French president rectified.
Yesterday, you said that the Finlandization of Ukraine was one option on the table. What did you mean by that?
You've never heard me say the word you used there to talk about Ukraine. I wasn't making a comparison. I said only that putting an end to NATO's open door policy would be a problem for several European states like Finland and Sweden, for example.
So, Gulliver Cragg, what do you make of that rectification there by the French president?
Well, I think that was something he needed to say in Kiev, because the Ukrainians weren't impressed at all by the idea of Finlandization, because I think that the origin of the term comes from a deal under which Finland lost some of its territory to the Soviet Union, if I'm not mistaken. So people in Ukraine started wondering if that meant that Macron was possibly envisaging some kind of acceptance of the annexation of Crimea by Ukraine, which obviously Ukraine is not willing to accept. Ukraine is obviously also not willing to give up on its ambitions to join NATO, which are written into its constitution. People have talked about some form of Ukrainian neutrality as a potential solution to this crisis. But if you start applying the word Finlandization to it, that's really not a good way to try to persuade the Ukrainians to accept that idea at all.
All right, and even if Finlandization was an option, it's not what Kiev wants, as you say, Gulliver, now that it's a hard-baked application for NATO.
And can I also...
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the main thing also is that Ukraine, although it has to pay lip service to the Minsk agreements as the only agreement they've got on the table, and that's what Zelensky did again today, Ukraine absolutely cannot apply the Minsk agreements in the way that Putin envisages, which basically involves Ukraine giving a very extensive autonomy to the areas currently controlled by the Russian-backed separatists without their armed forces having been withdrawn, without Ukraine having regained control of the border. Even if Zelensky thought that it might be the least worst option to avoid war, it's just not something that's going to be politically acceptable for him. He would lose power at best. At worst, there would be riots in Ukraine, which quite a lot of Ukrainian experts are speculating may actually be what Putin exactly wants. So if Macron came to Zelensky hoping to try to persuade him to move forward with applying the Minsk agreements in the way that Vladimir Putin wants, which is what he seemed to be suggesting he was promising to Vladimir Putin, Zelensky has really no option but to say no to that, to say, of course, this is the only document we have, but we all know very well that the Ukrainians have a very different interpretation of it to the Russians, so it's really kind of a non-starter. And Ukrainian media are reporting that although the meeting with Macron was very cordial, in reality, Zelensky was not at all impressed with the suggestions he brought from Moscow.
Yeah, well, the Kremlin's looked at those changes to the constitution in Kiev and that hard-baked application for NATO membership and says that the way it understands Finlandization, it wouldn't apply in this case.
Finlandization is great, but there's a Ukrainian constitution and doctrinal documents where we see that it's about the anti-Finlandization of Ukraine.
The anti-Finlandization of Ukraine. That's a second word I discovered today. Alexandra Filipenko, what do you do? Because this question of NATO membership, it's pretty binary, right? It's either yes or no. And Macron is saying out loud what everybody kind of knows anyway, which is that it's not going to happen anytime soon, right?
Yes, exactly. And we should remember that, first of all, the Maidan started when Ukrainian government first promised for Ukraine to try to join the European Union and then withdrew this promise. And that's when Maidan started, and then when the freedom revolution of Ukraine started, and let's say the birth process of Ukrainian nation started. Because the Ukraine has always feared of coming back, let's say, to the Soviet Union, if we can put it this way, or under Russian guidance, under Russian quote unquote protection, let's say, because we all know that President Putin has said, he repeatedly said that the collapse of the Soviet Union is the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. Not the First World War or the Second World War, but the collapse of the Soviet Union, according to Putin, is the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. So Ukraine knows very well, and Belarus knows very well, that, of course, Baltic states will not come back under Russian rule, definitely, because they are members of NATO. But Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, they are all under pressure of maybe becoming part of Russia again, or any other kind of unity, let's say, as the Soviet Union. So this is one of the biggest fears, let's say. And that is why for Ukraine it is a very important issue, of course. We we all understand that joining NATO, it doesn't happen in a minute. It doesn't happen overnight, because we all know that all member states of the Atlantic Council must vote that any other country joins NATO. So no one is sure that everyone will vote for it. But this opportunity is extremely important for Ukraine, even not only politically, but also psychologically, let's say, that they are not under protection of the European Union, but at least they have the support of European partners, of world partners, of NATO partners.
All right. So that brings us back to what we've seen in the last 24 hours in this diplomatic frenzy. I'll begin with you on this question. Alexandra Filipenko. If the aim, after you've had this troop buildup that's began in October, is to offer some kind of way for Vladimir Putin to save face without offering many concessions, how do you go about it?
Well, yes, this is the biggest question right now. Will the troops be withdrawn from that region? Because Kremlin repeated a few times that the troops are being moved within Russian territory. So without moving these troops out further back from the border, again, it's a non-starter. So this is one of the issues, I think, that, let's hope that President Macron really got President Putin's agreement of, first of all, moving troops from Belarus back to Russia, and also moving some of the troops from the border with Ukraine, because otherwise probably there is no way of moving forward. Because yes, of course, as you've said absolutely correctly, Washington's policy is much harsher, and it works both ways. And we know that President Putin is the person who likes to showcase that he doesn't crack under pressure. So this diplomatic way is probably the way to go. And again, President Putin is not the person who... Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if my connection is
we
quite
can hear you
good.
loud and clear.
Yeah. So probably this is a good way to move in both directions. The Washington way is a good way, but President Putin is, as I've said, he doesn't like to show that he cracks under pressure. He likes to showcase that he's a strong man.
Right.
So this diplomatic way is probably the right and the correct way. And President Macron, again, as I've said, he's saying exactly the words that President Putin and Kremlin wants to hear.
Ketevan Gorjestani, you said so earlier in the conversation, this strategy of taking Putin at his word, of saying, yes, it is alarming. Yes, there are a lot of troops building up. Yes, there's going to be an invasion. It seems to have caught the Kremlin off guard, this alarmist strategy. Does Washington also have a strategy when it comes to letting the Russian president, again, save face without offering Moscow concessions or many concessions?
Of course, and that's been the strategy all along. If you listen to all the different officials who have spoken on the issue of Russia, there's always the same wording. Basically, we want diplomacy. We think that the diplomatic path is the most responsible path, and it is the one that can bring the better results for everyone involved. So we will continue to work. As long as the Russians want to talk, we will keep talking along with our allies. But we are also prepared if this doesn't work, and we will be prepared on all fronts. Whatever form that aggression on Ukraine takes, we will be prepared, whether it is invasion.
But again, let me ask you this, Ketevan, let me ask you this. Earlier we talked about Emmanuel. We were wondering aloud if Emmanuel Macron was being too soft on Moscow, if that's the right way to approach the Kremlin. The question is Washington, again, in its rhetoric, being too hard? What's the thinking in Washington?
Well, there is a sense that they don't want to make the same mistakes as they've made in the past. And so they feel like they need to show Putin that they're not playing around, that they are willing to talk, but they're not also going to just go along with Russia's games. And so I feel like this time around, the Americans want to be extremely firm and extremely clear about what they're saying. And you saw that last week when there was that response, the American response, which was leaked to a European paper. And basically the Americans said, well, we didn't leak it, but you can see we say exactly the same thing in private and in public, and we are going to put our limits, put our red lines to Russia so that Russia knows and Russia can make an informed decision. So I think the Americans believe that they need to be firm, and maybe at least the Biden administration, even if they don't say that publicly, and even if you see criticism in the media, maybe they like the fact that the Europeans are a little bit, quote unquote, soft and more diplomatic, because it allows them to be firmer and still continue with that diplomatic path.
Ulrika Franke, is this a well-oiled, good cop, bad cop routine that we're seeing unfold?
I'm hoping it is. And I don't think that's an absurd idea. I mean, it's maybe not quite as well-oiled as we would like it to be, but I do agree that from everything that I've heard, there indeed have been so many consultations between the transatlantic allies. And again, Macron, has really been talking just in the last few days with Charles Michel, with Stoltenberg, with Biden, with Scholz. They're meeting. I think there's a lot of discussion going on. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that they really worked this out, good cop, bad cop, and really discussed every little thing that everyone says. But I do believe that there is actually more unity in message than one could think looking just at the media coverage, which again, seems to emphasize divisions and mistrust and all of this. But I think internally, especially over the last week, after a bit of a more rocky start at the beginning of the crisis, I think that the transatlantic allies and the European allies are really trying to have a unified message and are trying to kind of play on their different levels of engagement and closeness with Vladimir Putin. So I remain hopeful that that's at least part of what we're saying, rather than a cacophony of different voices.
The last time Emmanuel Macron was in Berlin, that press conference that he had with Olaf Scholz made for a little bit of painful viewing at times, because you had reporters 3 times asking the German chancellor why he's not exporting weapons to Ukraine. This was just after the British had said they were sending those anti-tank hardware to Kiev. And we saw 3 times the German chancellor dodge the question. Then a couple of days later, when they offered those helmets, there was a hashtag 5,000 helmets that started trending on Twitter. Has he become more polished since, or are we going to see the same Olaf Scholz?
I don't think Olaf Scholz is going to change anytime soon. I mean, I have to say he seemed more direct in a way in the interview he did in English with the CNN, rather than the interviews he's been doing or press conferences he's been doing in German. So there's that. He's not changing his message or German foreign policy. But I think this government, which admittedly only has been in power for a little while, is kind of getting its act a little bit together more, and is kind of getting better at communication, be it on the helmet or on the arms export. So there has been a little bit of improvement there, but I wouldn't expect a change, neither in the way that Olaf Scholz is, nor in this German stance on the export of lethal weapons, war weapons, as they are being called in the German debate.
In this crisis, having Olaf Scholz at the helm rather than Angela Merkel, does it make any difference, or would it have been exactly the same?
I think it makes a slight difference. I mean, of course, Merkel had this great standing in Europe after 16 years in power. Also because of her personal experience as an East German, she was always seen as a kind of important player in any relationships with Russia, while Olaf Scholz, since he's from the Social Democrats, which have a, let's call it, complex relationship with Russia, is seen as a bit less steady hand, but broadly speaking, I mean, German foreign policy doesn't change with the government. There are broad levels of continuity on the policies itself. I don't think that a Merkel government would have acted extremely differently, but yeah, on the nuances, on the kind of standing of Germany in this debate, I think there would have been a difference simply because Angela Merkel was this kind of really important actor within the EU that Olaf Scholz just isn't yet, because he just came to power, and it's different for him.
One final question. This will be the final word. I'll put it to you, Alexandra Filipenko. So last 24 hours, the German chancellor goes to Washington. The French president goes to Moscow. He goes to Kiev. He's in Berlin. They have the Polish president flying in. Do you feel like something's happening, or this is all kabuki theater?
No, actually, I would say let them talk. Let them talk as long as they talk, and as they can talk as long as they want, 5 hours, 10 hours, with the biggest tables and everyone at the table. It's better to bring everyone to the table. Let them talk, because as long as they talk, there are no rockets flying, and there is no war. As long as politicians talk.
And speaking of talking, they're just coming in now for their press conference. Alexandra Filipenko, Kedevan Gorgeous, Stani, Ulrika Franca, and Gulliver Craig, thanks for being with us.